When I first had the idea for this channel, I immediately thought to myself, I'm definitely going to give up after a handful of videos. But then I thought to myself, I should cover the original Planet of the Apes films, and I didn't know why. Well, my track record and low opinion of myself, but the second thing was a mystery. I soon realized, though, that mystery was the reason. There exists an entire saga, 4 whole sequels, that nobody seems to talk about despite being follow-ups to one of the most famous sci-fi films of all time, and I haven't the slightest clue what they're like, so please join me as I discover this curiously obscure series. I can't wait to see if I think they should have been forgotten, or why am I using future tense? I've obviously seen the movies now. I have a 6,000 word script in my hand. Why am I lying to you?
You maniacs! You blew it up!
Did it age well is always the #1 question around older pieces of sci-fi, because it seems like they're either timeless or very much not, with little room in the middle. In the case of Planet of the Apes, it very much is the former, and a lot of that is thanks to how the film approaches its great characters. Yes, Charlton Heston's Taylor is a solid, rugged protagonist, we'll get to him, but I'm specifically talking about the apes, who make up the vast majority of the cast. Despite the film's madhouse setting, they're all written and performed with such normalcy. Even as someone who is very accustomed to today's bizarre CGI alien characters and the like, I did find it striking just how recognizable these theoretically bizarre characters are. I was immediately rooting for Dr. Zira, a stubborn, compassionate psychologist, and her archaeologist husband Cornelius, being more reserved and cynical, works great to balance out her fearlessness. Positioned against them and their academic pursuits is Dr. Zaius, who in the end reveals himself to be a fascinating villain, someone fully aware of his own hypocrisy but completely at peace with that being the price to pay for what he sees as the greater good. I don't want to sound like I'm blown away because what? Lame old movie good? I'm trying to communicate that, like all great sci-fi, it works because they committed to the character-driven drama, despite the monkey costumes. My biggest critique of the movie is that it drags a bit. It could probably stand to drop a couple minutes, and before you call me a dang millennial ruined by Marvel movies, I actually think the action scenes are the ones most in need of trimming. In fact, one of my favorite sections of the movie is the opening stretch where Taylor and his crew just wander this strange alien world. It has really great atmosphere, and their conversations do a good job establishing their camaraderie and laying the philosophical groundwork of the film. And oh boy, had I forgotten just how politically driven this movie is. What if monkeys is just the sensationalized selling point, a way to trick people into seeing a movie that's actually about the eternal conflict between science and religion? How knowledge's inevitability will always threaten power when that power is built on immutable faith, and how faith is consistently used to justify any and all evils done in its name. And hang on, I signed up for baboons, not blasphemy. Planet of the Apes' absurd premise does not detract from these serious things on its mind, though. Quite the opposite. Taylor is the only intelligent, non-caveman person on the planet, an aberration that is very, very normal to us, the human audience. The apes' literally religious denial of this fact, the way they try to explain away Taylor's and by extension our own very existence, is just ridiculous on its face, and that primes the viewer to see this pattern in the damnable light in which it deserves to be seen. It also puts the audience in the shoes of someone oppressed by these power structures, and for a lot of people that might not be a very familiar position. Looking at you, Charlton, pry my guns from my cold dead hands, Heston. Oh, by the way, has anyone gone and picked those up yet? Planet's thoughtful core should not come as a surprise. After all, it was co-written by Rod Serling, the mastermind behind Twilight Zone, and oh boy do we get a Twilight Zone-esque hook. Taylor's arc in the film is very strong. He learns an appreciation for humanity after losing his identity as his own misanthropy is literalized in the apes. But in classic Twilight Zone fashion, the man who left the dang planet just to get away from people is not only doomed to fall victim to some of humankind's worst tendencies, but to eventually face the harsh reality that everything Zaius said about his kind was right, that he never did and never can escape man's sins. This ubiquitous and brilliant twist is equal parts of its time and timeless. It is exactly the kind of warning you'd expect from a film made in the middle of the Cold War. The implications of nuclear warfare is very, very clear. However, we also as a species are seemingly insane, so concerns of self-destruction will never not be applicable. Also, we have like so many more nukes now. This twist also marks the end of my, and I assume most people's, familiarity with these movies. So from here, we journey out into the unknown. Just like Taylor and Elsa from Frozen 2.
Say it.
Taylor.
It's Doomsday.
I was aware going in that Charlton Heston was not in all 5 of these movies, but I knew he was in at least the first 2, so you can imagine my concern when the opening credits started rolling, and gosh, those sure are a lot of names appearing before his. Yeah, Taylor literally drops out of the story quite early. He is not the main character of Beneath, but he is back for the climax, and that gives him just enough screen time for me. Unfortunately, his replacement, Brent, is bland, and having our new lead just be another modern human astronaut whose ship, for reasons, followed Taylor's right after and was never mentioned, that got an eye roll from me. If Heston didn't want to commit enough time to be the lead and Taylor's substitute isn't going to bring anything new to the table, they should have just recast Taylor and not forced the new guy. I can't tell if one of the reasons they didn't recast was because they needed padding, or if Brent's condensed version of Taylor's earlier discoveries was just unavoidably going to feel like padding, but either way, the name of the game is padding for a lot of the movie's first half. Brent does need to get his bearings for us to proceed though, so I don't know how else they could have written around that, except, not do Brent. The good news is that Zira and Cornelius are here. Disappointingly, Cornelius was recast, proving that the producers are familiar with the concept. And also disappointingly, they seem to undo his arc of finding some courage from the last movie, because he's back to keep your head down mode. Fortunately, Zira stays wonderful. Once again, she serves as the film's moral center, and she is definitely my favorite character of the series.
Why, is innocence so evil?
Ignorance is.
She's only in a handful of scenes and doesn't do anything of consequence, though. There's a suggestion of a subplot with her, Cornelius, and the also returning Dr. Zaius maybe uniting to stop a brewing war with the humans, and that would have been great. I love the idea of Zaius losing control of this militant monster he helped create, and they even briefly touch on the anti-war movement, but none of that goes anywhere. On the positive side, Beneath does a lot of conceptual sequel stuff that I really like. Something I hadn't thought about before is that Planet of the Apes is a post-apocalyptic movie, but it couldn't do anything with that without tipping its hand. Beneath could have dispensed with that, but instead they just lazily use shots of the real New York.
Hate New York City.
Okay, no, but seriously, this is some really cool Fall of Man imagery. The new villain General Ursus, while underused like Zaius, represents a few great sequel ideas as well. For one, he brings the escalation you want in a follow-up. There are shots of his guerrilla army that genuinely wowed me, and him wanting to launch an invasion of the Forbidden Zone because Taylor seemingly revealed that intelligent people are out there is a very logical way to use the first film's plot. Also, the Ape Society is a theocracy, and historically speaking, you cannot claim to wield divine power without inevitably getting yourself into a holy war. I immediately got the Crusade vibes they were going for, and I commend the film for going in this direction.
Bless, we pray you, our great army.
Alright, so, being the storyteller that I am, being as childishly obsessed with theatrics as I am, I've been intentionally talking around an important aspect of this film, and that is that Taylor and Brent do discover beneath the Planet of the Apes a hidden society of intelligent, non-animalistic people. And, well, they're psychic.
Of course I know who I am. I'm an astronaut.
Now, my first reaction was probably the same as yours. This is delightful, but disastrous. We are already just rocketing off the rails here. But I have to say, I did come around. Yes, the mutants are very, very silly, even by Planet of the Apes standards, but the more I thought about it, the more I liked the idea of a human remnant secretly evolving for millennia. And the fact that they secretly look like the ghouls from Fallout? Yeah, this is an interesting faction, and they help the world feel bigger. They are also a theocracy, one that worships the atomic bomb itself, giving them two very strong links to the identity and themes of the franchise. And they are also a very pointed piece of commentary, a spiteful caricature of those who see warfare as a kind of salvation. They are intentionally not unlike General Ursus and the guerrilla army that marches towards them. So yeah, as goofy as the mutants obviously are, I can't say that they don't have quality ideas behind them. I can't pretend like they're all good either, though. On top of their bluntness, the literalness of the bomb worshipping does lessen this theme's broader applicability. Unlike the first film's Doom, which again is pretty dang explicit, there is absolutely zero wiggle room for other interpretations here. And just like the Ape Army subplot, these guys are ultimately underdeveloped. They say their deal, then our heroes fight them. It's the kind of conflict that worked to introduce a recurring threat on a TV show, but it falls short when it's the faction's beginning, middle, and end. If they were going to be more than just evil weirdos, they would have needed more screen time. The whole film feels half-baked like this, to be honest. These pieces I'm describing are present, but I'm definitely tying them all together for the sake of this video in a more neat way than the film itself does. None of it really culminates meaningfully. In an ideal world, the film would focus on Taylor finding and learning about the mutants, while Zira and tenuous ally Zaius try to stop the war, and then these more fleshed-out storylines would collide for the climax to much greater effect. This would be more than doable, by the way, if the film wasn't so busy rehashing stuff thanks to Brent. God, I did not realize how much I hated Brent. Well, at least he dies. Speaking of characters who die, now's the time to address Nova, and no, I'm not talking about those excellent mobile games. That joke was for me. Sometimes I'm gonna do jokes for me. Nova is the woman you've certainly noticed in a few clips from these two films, and she is practically a parody of how badly female characters can be written. She's a caveman person, so she doesn't speak, or have any characteristics, or will of her own. She's literally just there to wear a skimpy outfit and be hot. And obviously she's Taylor's love interest. Yikes. She does have one instance of great payoff in Beneath though, when she at last speaks, and in doing so saves the lives of Taylor and Brent. I honestly did not see that coming. My jaw literally dropped, so credit where credit is due. Of course, she then dies immediately after. At least they gave her an interesting thing to do. Nova's death spurs on the film's almost comedically dark ending. Now, I liked Taylor's unkind outlook on people. #mood. But his arc of the first film being undone because of that trope where the man character loses all faith in humanity after their woman is killed was just such a letdown. Plus, everybody dies is never a satisfying conclusion. I was hoping Beneath would take the Terminator/Judgment Day approach where the first film's ending is a downer, but then the sequel would offer the alternate, more optimistic conclusion of the same theme, but no.
A green and insignificant planet is now dead.
So everybody blew up, time for 3 more movies, I guess, and we've already hit telepathic Buzz Lightyear lookalikes. What's next? Time travel? Would you believe me if I said I wrote that before seeing the next movie? Can I get away with that?
The biggest story since the moon landing broke this morning when 2 apes talked. I repeat, talked to the Presidential Commission of Inquiry.
Escape from the Planet of the Apes takes place on modern-day Earth, and I cannot dance around that for the sake of a reveal. And while I guess the past was kind of the only place to go after the doomsday ending of Beneath, this change in setting does mark a massive shift in the franchise's identity. Some recognizable elements did survive Earth's destruction. The literal survivors are Cornelius and, praise the lawgiver, Zira. Turns out they rocketed off in Taylor's ship just in time to avoid the ending of Beneath, and wibbly-wobbly timey-wimey, they land in the 70s. I forgot to mention another way in which Escape is a turning point. From here on out we have exclusively ape protagonists, and while cynically you could say this is the series being forced to lean into its gimmick, I think it's a good thing that it no longer feels the need to have an audience surrogate character, because that's how we ended up with Brent. And on top of that, the world itself being hostile to the main character was a pretty big part of the original film, so now that we're in human world, you're gonna have to switch to ape. The plot of the film is basically a political drama, as different parties in Washington argue over how to handle these surreal arrivals. This allows for some parallels beyond the obvious inverting of roles. The commission hearing to determine the ape's intelligence clearly mirrors Taylor from the first film, and the 2 new human doctors, Lewis and Stephanie, are the same allies to Zira and Cornelius that they were to Taylor. And Brent. And there's a bit of a philosophical streak to the story. When it eventually comes out that the apes are from the future and that mankind falls maybe because of apes, our new villain Hasline, who Taylor did mention by name as involved with his mission, sees Zira and Cornelius as an existential threat and wants them killed. Basically everybody else treats them like celebrities though, which leads to conflict. And as interesting as this debate of time travel and the ethics of destiny sounds, at the end of the day the film doesn't go much deeper than the baby Hitler question. As in, they literally bring up baby Hitler.
Yes, but would we have approved killing him in babyhood when he was still innocent?
Something that's gone into too deeply is the lore, because Escape does some revisions. Despite human civilization previously being established as long gone when the apes took over, now Cornelius can suddenly rattle off a contradictory story about how humans enslaved apes, which led to an ape revolution, and then an unrelated fall of man let them become the dominant species. This is a significant change, and while it doesn't remove the nuclear war aspect from the series, it just adds its own little bit on top of it. In the process, that just makes it messy, and I don't like it. Now, you might be wondering, as I was, why they're making these changes now. Well, that'll make more sense when I tell you that the clips I just ran aren't from this movie, but it's 2 sequels. So that explains that. And that's basically as far as the similarities go. It's hard to overemphasize just how little this feels like what a Planet of the Apes movie has been thus far. I mean, just listen to the soundtrack. So if we're not dealing with a traditional Planet of the Apes movie, what are we dealing with? What takes the place of bleak post-apocalypse and the abuses of organized religion? Why, fish out of water comedy, of course. Okay, Escape isn't a full-on comedy or anything, but still, we go from one of the bleakest endings this side of Infinity War, ooh, maybe I have been ruined by Marvel movies, to a lot of jokes. Funny jokes at that.
Cornelius.
My lawfully wedded spouse.
Wedded?
We'll take that up later, Your Eminence.
For what feels like a lot of the film's runtime, it may as well be a standalone movie about 2 aliens who crash land on Earth and then just hang out in LA. We chill with Zira and Cornelius in their hotel room, they discover the peculiar things we humans do, and I kid you not, they go shopping. There is a fashion montage. Needless to say, if someone was mainly drawn to the grimness and thoughtfulness of the series, I can see them absolutely hating this. It reeks of the same studio desperation that covers slasher franchises when they do an installment in space. But the thing is, I've always liked space. I can't hate this part of the movie. Like I mentioned before, the comedy does land, but much more importantly, how can I not enjoy a lighthearted romp with my favorite character of the franchise?
How is that?
Soothing.
Kim Hunter makes every scene she's in work. She is so good as Zira, although I was devastated to learn that back on the original film, the role was offered to none other than Ingrid Bergman.
I remember every detail. The Germans wore gray, you wore blue.
Yes, I put that dress away.
It's also great to have Roddy McDowall back as Cornelius, and now's the perfect time to note that I have always appreciated just how genuine his and Zira's relationship has felt. I know that this severe tonal departure is a blatant selling out, but it's hard for me to be upset when I end up having a drink with Zira. And the drama around this comedy is engaging. A lot of that is thanks to Hasselin, who continues the series' knack for compelling villains. Not only is Eric Braeden's performance great, but Hasselin isn't fundamentally reprehensible like Zaius. You understand why he does what he does.
We think we got all the time in the world. How much time has the world got?
And as anyone who knows me can tell you, I deeply, deeply relate to a man who slowly loses his cool in the face of an apocalyptic threat that nobody seems to be doing anything about, who then dies in the Los Angeles harbor after being shot by a monkey. Oh, if I had a nickel. The revelation that Zira is pregnant also certainly makes things real for us and Hasselin, and I was engrossed during the resulting climax. After being smuggled out of government custody by Louis, Stephanie, and Armando, an extremely charming circus owner played by Ricardo Montalban, our leads are definitely in actual danger, so as much as the comedy sticks out, it's not like this film is without stakes, far from it. And we do end, as is tradition, on not the cheeriest of notes. I saw the writing on the wall the second Zira was revealed to be pregnant, but that does not mean it was any easier to see my favorite chimpanzee killed after witnessing her husband's equally violent death. Having watched all 5 films, I can confirm that they never replaced Zira's warmth and passion, and she is sorely missed moving forward. The film then shows their baby seemingly killed as well, and I think they were hoping that our expectations for these endings would make us buy it, but it is quickly revealed that their child had been switched with one of the chimps at the circus. It's nice, especially after given how generally light this movie is, to get something resembling a happy ending from this series, and it marks the first time a Planet of the Apes movie ends in a way that clearly indicates they know where they want the story to go next. I was not around in 1971, that or I have an excellent skin routine, but I can see myself rejecting the changes made if I was. In 2021 though, I had fun. Escape is far from the film I expected, or arguably the film it should have been, but it mostly succeeds at what it's trying to be, and I greatly enjoyed my all too brief time hanging out in LA with my cool Aunt Zira. Wait, the expression's monkey's uncle. I can do something with that, hang on. Hang on.
How do you propose to gain this freedom?
by the only means left to us. Revolution.
Conquest of the Planet of the Apes just might be a DeLorean because it takes this franchise back to the future. Well, to the 90s, anyway. The most significant change that Conquest brings to the table comes up immediately and because of this time jump. We come in on a near-future Earth that has become reliant on apes who have been trained to do various menial tasks, and this was an instant revelation to me. While Conquest is still very different from the first two installments of the series, it doesn't feel completely removed like its immediate predecessor. Part of this is the return to a darker tone. Conquest managed to get a PG rating unlike the rest, but I've realized that the much more important things are the dystopia backdrop, the futurist architecture, and just the weirdness of ape slaves everywhere. Turns out part of the secret recipe for these films is having some sort of bizarre setting, and one of the failings of Escape is that even the 70s don't quite cut it. As hinted at the end of Escape, our lead is Zira and Cornelius' son, Caesar, and take a look who's returning with him. It's Armando. After Armando is arrested and then dies to protect Caesar from discovery, we get a clever inversion of Taylor's plight from the first film, as Caesar has to hide his intelligence in order to blend in with the regular apes. This eventually lands him in the service of Governor Breck, who, if you can't tell by the Reich-evoking outfits of his police, is our villain, and California seems to be under a repressive regime. Meaning that in this world, Fox News is right about something. Madhouse indeed. These outfits clue us in pretty quickly on how the film is going to simultaneously return to and pivot the central themes of the franchise. As Cornelius' history lesson in Escape foretold, the focus of this movie is an uprising of the enslaved apes. Now right away, this is not a perfect analogy. By keeping Caesar as uniquely intelligent for the sake of the story, the only person we could say for our purposes, the other apes are just animals with jobs. And while I of course don't want people to mistreat animals, I simply do not hold seeing eye dogs as a moral equivalent to actual slavery. Sorry PETA, don't at me. This relates to the shaky world building of Conquest. Now, I accepted the revised lore when I started the movie. I count that as a mark against Escape, but if they're going to commit to it, so will I. They clearly had their endpoint in mind and worked backwards, though. Caesar gathers his formidable ape army and arsenal over the course of what seems like a week or two, and on top of that, the apes go from gorillas to gorillas just as quickly. Cornelius had stated that this evolution took centuries, but that's not going to fit into one movie, and I also get that they really liked the ape coup idea for the climax. It is pretty awesome, but the film undeniably trips a little, trying to take so many steps in one bound. Despite those critiques, Conquest does still work as a basic anti-oppression story. I didn't bring up those flaws just to sound smart. They do weaken its impact a bit, but it is mostly well executed and is a noble message. And it's on brand. The original Planet of the Apes dealt with authority abusing its power, so this fits right into that school of thought, and it's great to see the series return to social concerns. And as you may recall from a few months ago, I am always down for a virtuous insurgence. I was disappointed that there are no theocratic overtones to this evil government. I would have liked to see Conquest do a complete inversion of the original and put those injustices in the context of our political institutions, but I respect that the film has a different target. It was made in the immediate aftermath of the civil rights movement, and it has no interest in being subtle about what broad cultural feelings it's tapping into. And this direction makes sense given the politics of the series, the time it was made, and it is commendable. I don't want to downplay the importance of that goal by saying that I wish the monkeys were also mad at the Pope. I don't know how to feel about parts of this connection to real-world atrocities, though. Having the governor's heroic right hand, MacDonald, the first major black character of the entire franchise, declare himself the descendant of slaves and then be the one to tell Caesar to fight slavery nicer, please, seems complicated. And yeah, the fact that the stand-ins for oppressed black people are literal monkeys certainly seems questionable given the racial connotations of that. Now, I am not qualified to give any sort of conclusive thesis on those choices, but they seemed worth bringing up as part of the film's well-meaning but potentially misguided messaging. All of these thematic successes and falterings, as well as Caesar's arc of becoming a leader, come together for his big victorious speech at the close of the film after he's toppled Governor Breck's rule. This scene is more intense than I expected. I actually wondered for a minute if Caesar was going to end the film a villain. He did become wrathful after Armando's death, much like Taylor did after Nova's, but no, he does not start genociding, unfortunately. So I noticed that all the shots of Caesar at the end of the speech, where he's saying, let's actually not kill all humans, let's be nice, they're shot really close up and you can't see his mouth, so they're seemingly ADR'd. And then if you take the shots of the apes lowering their weapons and reverse it, it looks more natural, and they're definitely raising them. So I don't want to go all tinfoil hat here. Yes, I do. I think the plan was originally to have Caesar end in a much darker place, but they changed it in post, and that's a shame for reasons that I will get to in the next section. However, this scene does bring back something I hadn't realized has been missing for a spell, and that's anger. Despite the countless times it's been parodied, God Damn You All to Hell still cuts with its righteous fury. Planet of the Apes was not just entertainment, it was a piece of sci-fi with many bones to pick, so Conquest's rage is very welcome. I do have to say that this tried and true Revolution plot, while bearing all those conceptual thumbs ups, does keep Conquest from being the most captivating film in the series. It doesn't break much new ground. If I can close by shifting into straightforward review mode for a minute, there's also slow pacing in the second act, Governor Breck is an underwhelming villain, and there's a very jarring lack of music for a few key moments, and all of that also holds Conquest back. Its head is in the right place, but its execution is good, not great. Also, I want to be on the side of the underdog, and I hate to be a downer, but on behalf of myself and my boy Hosseline, I do have to wonder if Conquest's ending isn't just as bleak as the rest, if because of Caesar's success here, humankind isn't now doomed. And if that's the case, we can lay blame for the demise of our entire race squarely on the shoulders of one man.
I shall leave you as you left me, marooned for all eternity in the center of a dead planet, buried alive, buried alive.
Tell me something, MacDonald. Can we make the future what we wish?
I've heard that it's possible, Caesar.
Battle for the Planet of the Apes is not just the last movie they bothered to make. Fortunately for fans and this video, it was made to be the conclusion of the franchise, and as such, there's quite a bit to dive into. We rejoin Caesar roughly a dozen years after we last saw him, and he now leads a primarily ape society out in the woods of California. The apes have already evolved to possess full speech and intelligence. They're pretty much exactly what they were in the original film. So yes, Battle continues Conquest's trend of being named like Smash Bros. Games, and also throwing all logic out the window with regards to its timeline. The filmmakers wanted their new setting and figured that audiences would care about following a specific character, Caesar, more than they would about realism, and they were correct. Because here's the thing, it's all about trade-off. Conquest's time frame was nonsense too, but it enabled a good story, and it's the same thing here. An orangutan evolving over a measly 12 years to the point where they can theorize about time relativity is absolutely ludicrous. It's been that long since 2010, and some people still haven't figured out Inception. However, in return for letting that slide, the series gets to return to its roots. I loved seeing a world much like that of the original too. Turns out I really missed that, and plenty of modern era elements have been carried over as a bonus, like the handful of normal people that live in Caesar's town, and of course Caesar himself. On the subject of humans though, we are subservient to apes in Caesar's society, and that's because despite what all the green might suggest, sometime between films 4 and 5, we did kinda nuke ourselves. Going back to the apes, sorry for the convoluted whiplash that is my intellectual process, I've never bothered discussing the class hierarchy in the ape society, but it's a thing. Clear traits and roles have been given to chimpanzees, orangutans, and gorillas since the original. Zira in particular rants a lot about how gorillas are all stupid and aggressive, and the films only affirmed that prejudice. I bring this up now because it's back, now that their society's back. We're at the end of the series, so I can say it's never explored, and it also goes against the unique theme of this installment, so let's put a pin in that. Pretty much everything else I have to say about Battle revolves around its, I think, absolutely fascinating relationship with probably the last of these movies you'd expect, Beneath the Planet of the Apes. And this goes beyond just a few major plot similarities, because the entire narrative and thematic engine of Battle for the Planet of the Apes is to stop Beneath from happening. The story begins with Caesar wanting to be a better leader, seeking information about the future. So MacDonald, who's actually the brother of the MacDonald in Conquest, was recasting illegal back then. Take Caesar to some archives in Los Angeles where they find the interviews of Zira, Ye, and Cornelius from Escape. This connects Battle to Escape, obviously, but also to Beneath, as now they have been warned about the ultimate cataclysm that will befall both man and ape should their wars continue. The Beneath Battle link goes further though, because in going to the archives, Caesar accidentally reveals his city's existence to a faction of underground human survivors. Humans whose faces are beginning to peel due to radiation and wear very familiar looking hats. The mutants are back. Praise the holy Fallout. Now, they're not the Charles Xavier kind yet, unfortunately, but they are absolutely their ancestors, and their inclusion helps the stakes in such a simple way. If the ape society looks like it did in the original, and even the mutants are here, that means that the gears of Beneath are very much in motion. And the other threat Caesar has to deal with comes from within, as a war-hungry guerrilla general gets out of his control and goes to attack the mutants. This movie is about Beneath, while also being a sequel, prequel, and partial remake of Beneath. And all of that without a sign of Brent. It's not all upgrades, though. The new Guerrilla General, Aldo, is no Ursus. Sometimes his pathetic bully shtick works as intended, but he's often just a pathetic bully, not very intimidating or interesting. We do get one last memorable villain with the proto-mutant leader, Governor Culp, who was actually Governor Breck's chief enforcer back in Conquest. This guy is a fun, personality-driven villain, and we almost didn't get one of those from the series.
If we shoot, we break 12 years of peace. Yes, it has been rather boring, hasn't it?
Also, these two antagonists really highlight just how anti-war and, as far as I can tell, anti-military this franchise is. That's another political through line that's present in most installments, and that I like. Violence does come to Caesar's home, though, and while I am anti-war, I am a pro-fictional war radical, and this kind of climax is exactly why. They seem to put the majority of their budget into the third act. The film had been pretty tame with its spectacle up to this point. Like Beneath, they even cheaply used real footage of a city, this time Los Angeles. I hate the CGI always bad line of thinking, but even I have to admit that the practical effects and the sheer number of clearly real extras is quite spectacular. I didn't expect Battle to match Conquest's also impressive extra work, but they definitely did. So Caesar wins the battle with Culp with an Ewok-esque trick that really highlights the tonal middle ground this film had struck between Conquest and Escape, but Aldo is still attempting to seize Caesar's power. When it's revealed that Aldo killed Caesar's son earlier in the film, the apes turn on him for breaking their ape shall not kill ape law, and Caesar avenges his son. Caesar is angry with McDonald and all humans after once again seeing their warlike ways, but then it's pointed out to him that Aldo was not human and that he just committed murder too, so hey, maybe we ain't so different. Now, as a screenwriter, an aspiring screenwriter, I do have to say that this arc would have been a lot stronger if Caesar did end Conquest as a villain, if he started Battle as tyrannical towards humans, but because of the warning from his parents, and maybe with the help of a friendship with McDonald, he had to change his ways in order to change the fate of the world. That's what I would have done, anyway. In the end, this film was about people of all kinds getting along. That fits, especially with Conquest, and I'm all for that, so we're good, right? Except, remember that pin from earlier? Yeah, it's a little confusing to hear a message about equality from a series that maintains strict moral distinctions between the races of its made-up society like a lesser D&D campaign. It isn't the biggest deal, but the message and world-building of the series are undoubtedly misaligned here. You should treat your neighbor with friendship. Even if we're different, we are all equal in the eyes of God. Except for those half-witted guerrilla savages, am I right? Battle employs a simple framing device through the solo appearance of the Lawgiver. And side note, WoW is calling your world's Jesus figure Lawgiver a remarkably concise way to communicate the values of this society. We open on him telling the film's story as he gives a sermon centuries later, saying things that, back in the original film, were the basis of the ape's hatred of humans. But then at the end it's revealed that he's speaking to a crowd of both ape and human children, showing that harmony has been achieved at least for now, and implies that the events of Beneath will not occur. That Caesar, son of Zira and Cornelius, did indeed save the planet of the apes. Thank God we finally end on an uplifting note. I am glad that humans still ended up mostly destroying themselves. I think that's a pretty foundational pillar of the franchise, and it keeps Battle from going too far with a completely happy ending, so yeah, this is about as good as it gets. Now, I've made a few jokes about writing this as I'm watching the movies for the first time, you know, what did I know when and all that, but I am being completely truthful when I say that I did write those lines about wanting a cautiously optimistic a la Terminator Judgment Day ending out of Beneath before I saw Battle. So I'm very pleased to see that the final link between Battle and Beneath is giving me exactly that.
Oh my God, I was wrong. It was Earth all along.
What a treat going through this franchise was. I think I liked the first one well enough when I saw it many, many years ago, so I hoped I'd like the rest, but I did not expect to become such a genuine fan. It was also interesting to see such a fluid franchise. Nowadays, franchises seem to be much more controlled. They have the same characters, they'll stick to their fundamentals, progress linearly, stuff like that, and ultimately this is the superior approach. Planning ahead is good, actually, but there's also something to be said for a franchise that can pivot with each installment and consistently try something new. Despite these wild swings, I would argue that all 5 films share enough of the same core ideas and ideals to be considered cohesive, and Battle's success in bringing the overarching narrative full circle certainly helps with that. As if it needs to be said, none of the sequels surpass the original masterpiece, but I do think that every single one of them brings something worthwhile to the table, and to answer the question from the intro, do deserve to be at least part of the conversation, even today. And to address the elephant in the room, for those familiar with the modern films, yes, we will be discussing the other Caesar someday soon. The Andy Serkis Caesar. There's no Julius Caesar franchise, unfortunately. Although Charlton Heston did play Mark Antony in an adaptation of the Shakespeare play right after Planet of the Apes, so it's all connected.
Here was a Caesar! When comes such another?
Okay, so I've actually come up with 2 endings for this video. Here's the one if it gets really popular and lots of people watch it. Look at that view count. You maniacs, you blew it up. Okay, now here's the one if nobody watches it. I've decided I don't really like this final punchline anymore, so pretend instead I'm making some super topical joke about NFTs and how they should be nuked.